Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another exciting edition of Austin Interviews. And in today's show, I've got a special guest. Many of you may know him from the voice of college football, Mississippi State, where he co-hosts on the channel with Christian Ballard from Ballard Sports. Mr. Andrew Miller is joining us today. And here today on the show, we're going to talk about a little bit of everything about Mississippi State. We're going to talk about how he became a fan of the team, talk about some of the history, talk about their annual opponents going forward in 2026 and going forward. And we're also going to talk about how they're doing this year. And does he think Jeff Lebby can be the man to lead them the next 5-10 years? We're going to get into all that today. But Mr. Andrew Miller, how are you today? Happy Wednesday. Pleasure for you to be here. Thank you for being here.
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on. Always happy to sit down and talk about the Bulldogs. I'm doing great on this day. So let's ready to get into it.
Yes. And let's start by getting to know you a little bit. How did you become a Mississippi State fan for our newer viewers, or maybe someone that's just maybe checking this out for the first time? How did you find the Bulldogs? Was it something from family ties or maybe flipping through the TV? What made you want to love the Mississippi State Bulldogs above all else?
It's kind of weird. There's like a very minor family tie that led to it, but I don't think I became a fan of Mississippi State in the way that a lot of people adopt their college fandom. I feel like a lot of people, it's either a case of, okay, you were born into it, and that's like you were just, hey, no, you didn't have a choice. That's who you're going to grow up being a fan of, or you attend a school and that once you're there, you adopt those teams. For me, it was, I didn't grow up in a sports fan household. My dad, he liked sports to an extent, but he was very casual with it. I don't know if he really ever repped any teams. And as a kid, I did not care about sports whatsoever. I was not interested in it, and kind of started getting into football, with the Saints. And eventually I was like, I'm going to get into college ball too. And I was like, look, I'm a Mississippi kid. I want to cheer for a Mississippi team. And where I mentioned I have a family time, I had a cousin who graduated from State. So I was like, I guess I'll cheer for Mississippi State. And that's how it started. I went all in really quick and became obsessed with it, and ended up going to Mississippi State as my college. It was one of those deals where it really didn't matter what I wanted to do. That's where I wanted to go to school at that point, because I was going to feel weird going somewhere else having to cheer for another team. Mm-hmm. I just sort of adopted the team because I needed to find someone to cheer for in college, and I went with the in-state program, and I've been a Bulldog since.
Mm-hmm. And talk about how that led you to where you are now, because you said you went to college at Mississippi State. I'm sure that all prepared you, but now you currently have a co-host position where you do weekly shows on Mississippi State at the Voice of College Football. Matter of fact, beautiful link down below if you would like to go check him out. Great stuff. Does call-in shows, does lives, does post games, and he will give you his honest opinion. But how did this all come to be, Andrew? Was this just something you came through the algorithm, or was this something you sought out? Tell us, for the viewers at home, how you got this position.
For me, I mean, look, it had been kind of a few years. I'd kind of wanted to break into the sports media sphere in some way, shape, or form. And I had been doing a Mississippi State podcast with some friends for a while, just guys from college. We were sitting around talking about Bulldog football, and really Bulldog athletics as a whole. For a few years, I had been writing also with Maroon and White Nation, which is a Mississippi State's fan-sided blog. And I've since become the side expert of that a couple years ago now. And, it's funny. I had not heard of Voice of College Football. I won't sit here and say that it was something I was actively seeking out, but one of my co-hosts on the old podcast, he was reached out to because they were looking for someone to step in for the Mississippi State channel alongside Christian. And it was something that, he wasn't going to be able to do, but he was like, I know, that'd be right up Andrew's alley. So he sent it to me, and then I reached out to them, and it's worked out, and that's where it's gone since. Been on for about 3 months now, and it's been a lot of fun seeing the channel grow in just a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm. And just talk to us about how, it's one thing when you go into a podcast or start doing something and you have a good team like an Alabama, Ole Miss, one of those type teams. It's easier to get viewers. Have you found it challenging with Mississippi State that they're more of that? They're in a period where they're in a transition. They're trying to find their way again. Was it hard to to attract viewers, or was it something you thought, like when you like, was it hard for you at first, like to take this on, knowing Mississippi State wasn't a premier program that would get attraction immediately?
Well, I will say we are very much still in the growing phase in terms of gaining subscribers and gaining viewers. So it's not like we've built the channel up just a ton, but it has grown. And I didn't look at it that way. For me, it's just it's a chance to talk about a team that I like, and I do know that I did have a little bit of a following over on. I still call it Twitter. I don't know if I'll ever switch over to calling it X. It's just weird to me. People know me within the MSU fan base, and I don't mean like I'm some sort of an MSU presence. I have enough people who know me and enough people who listen to the other podcasts that I thought, hey, there may be some people who are still interested in my opinions, and luckily for me, there are still some. So they followed over to the other channel, and yeah, I think, I think there's a point to be made. You're not wrong that when a team is down, it can be tough to find people interested, but at the same time, I think there are a lot of people who are very eager to know, okay, well, how are things going to get better, and why are things going to improve? So I do think even going into the off season, there was a lot of attention, and which, to be fair, I got on late in the off season, so I wasn't really through it for the full. But in terms of the preview part of the year, where we're gearing up, like, okay, what is 2025 going to be? I do think you were able to get some people interested just in the fact of, like, okay, well, how's this Mississippi State team not going to be 2-10 again? And even for a team that's in transition, even for a team that's struggling, I do think that probably attracted some people.
And I think it's good that we have all these different platforms and team channels now. I know the internet could cause a lot of bad things. I don't think any of us would ever doubt that. But the good thing about it is there's something for everybody. If for anyone out there watching that knows Andrew or is going to give him a check him out. If you're a Mississippi State fan and you're like, I've been looking for someone to talk Mississippi State ball with, this is a perfect example of finding the right guy, the right opportunity, and the right person. And I feel like people, once they tune in, they'll realize, oh, they're not that bad. But what I want to transition into, Andrew, is the 2025 season. Speaking of this year, Mississippi State's off to a really good start, and a lot of people are excited. They're like, maybe Mississippi State can win 6-7 games, maybe make a good bowl game. But as a Mississippi State fan, I'd like to know from your perspective, kind of take it back just a hair. After Mike Leach passed away, God rest his soul, that's such a sad thing. But then David Arnett comes in, and it's kind of one of them, didn't pan out very well. And Jeff Lebby's first year, and you just mentioned 2-10, and not looking too high. But now here we are, 4-1. And we'll pull up Mississippi State's schedule because this is going to kind of help with a visual here. Just going back and then kind of going back forward, if you wouldn't mind. Talk about your feelings going after last season, now going into where we are now. Is Jeff Lebby turning the tide, so to speak, with Mississippi State, or is it maybe a break in the schedule? What do you think's caused this in just 2 years after everything they've been through so far?
I think he's turning the tide. You talk about the way things have transpired over the last few years, and it's been a tough transitional period for Mississippi State. And you'd kind of started to hit with Mike Leach. It was his third year, and it was 8-4 regular season, 9 wins after the bowl, and obviously that was after he passed. But that was still his team. So you have a 9-win team, and it kind of felt like, okay, this is where, if you look at Mike Leach's tenure at all of his previous stops, year 3, year 4 was about the point that things started to become steady, and his program starts seeing, pretty considerable success, especially relative to what those programs had typically achieved. And then he passes away. And it was always going to be a weird situation afterwards. Leach obviously built his team to do things a very specific way with the air raid. And it was kind of like, okay, well, how long are you going to hold on to that? How long is that going to continue to be the identity? It needed to be the identity for at least one more year. And Zach Arnett, the defensive coordinator at the time, who was promoted to the job, felt differently. And Arnett was such a weird thing because, man, he was really good as State's defensive coordinator for a few years there under Leach. He was someone that everyone viewed as the next guy in line is a clear up and comer that, like, I think that there were early talks because we knew Leach was older in age, that it was like, hey, if Mike Leach chooses to retire, promote Zach Arnett. And it was one of those deals where it was like, all right, we didn't want it to happen this way, but I think in the moment, a lot of people felt good about Arnett being the guy to lead it forward. And he just wasn't ready for the moment. It was not, he was not ready to take over in that situation. He certainly was not ready from a management standpoint. His decision to shift offenses so dramatically really cost that team. And that was an experienced roster his last year, which made it all more frustrating because you had some pieces back, especially on that offensive side of the ball, who what they knew was air raid, and they choose to take it another direction. And things fell apart really quick. And then you have the next year, you're losing all of that experience. So you have a situation of, Arnett, you move on from him after less than a season. And, you understand why State made the move. It was just very clear in that moment. You could not continue forward. He was not ready for that moment. But you're going from an experienced roster to an incredibly inexperienced roster. There's also a point to be had that recruiting for a few years was not where it needed to be, especially on the defensive side of the ball, so that whoever took over going forward was not going to be put in a great position. So you had a situation with very little experience, not a ton of SEC caliber talent on the roster. And then you have a first-time head coach stepping in, Jeff Lebby. And look, I'll be honest, at the time of the hire, I was a little bit questionable. And from a Lebby standpoint, it's not because I didn't think he wasn't deserving of an opportunity, not because I didn't think he was going to be a great, not because I didn't respect him as an outstanding offensive mind, because he was very proven in that. For me, it was the fact that I thought in that situation, Mississippi State needed a sitting head coach. Mississippi State needed someone who had done the job because, at that point, Arnett had not been a head coach. We saw it win. A few years prior, Joe Moorhead, he had been a head coach at the FCS level, but he had not been an FBS head coach, and he was not ready to step into Starkville and make that work, following Dan Mullen and the success that he had had. So I was like, everything is pointing to Mississippi State needs to get a guy who has done the job. And, they chose to go with, Jeff Lebby. And look, through 1 year, I think you saw a lot of the growing pains in one way or another. I think most of it was out of Lebby's control, again, from the roster situation inherited. I also think State was a little bit behind in the NIL sphere. And I know Chris Lowe put out a piece on 3 about that just a few weeks back, basically talking about how different things are this year from a financial standpoint behind the scenes. And I will say some of the numbers that were thrown around about what Mississippi State had available financially last year I don't think were accurate. I think they had more money than they were saying. The numbers this year are in line with what they actually had. They spent about $15 million on the roster this year. And from everything I've heard, that is accurate. But there was a lot of uphill. There was very much an uphill battle that Jeff Lebby had to take on. And I do think having an inexperienced guy in that moment, there were probably a little bit of a learning curve. But I will say this for Lebby, everything he was doing behind the scenes from a operational standpoint, even as a first-year head coach, I could look at and say, okay, I can see what you're doing, and I can understand the thought process here. I see the vision you're trying to put forth in the program. You obviously have to give this guy an opportunity, and I think it's been very clear he was the right guy for the job here early on. They have completely reshaped this roster in the offense of what they were able to do through the transfer portal. They are bigger, faster, stronger on the defensive side of the ball. They added more size and depth to the offensive line. They've added good talent at skill positions across the board. And they've made a lot of moves that have made this team night and day better from where it was a season ago. And, you look at the early part of the schedule, a few of those games, sure, they're weak non-conference opponents. But when you look at where Mississippi State was a season ago, FCS game was whatever. But, their only other win was against UMass, and they gave up 20 points to UMass. They got blown out at home by Toledo. And, respect to the Rockets, that is a very good G5 program. When you're an SEC team, you are not – even if you lose the game, you're not supposed to get blown out on your home soil. Like that, and that game was completely uncompetitive. So it was very clear just in the fact that they go on the road and handle Southern Miss. And it was kind of a sloppy first half, but in the second half, they really put the hammer down all the way, ended up winning that game comfortably. The Alcorn result, it's an FCS team, whatever. But, Northern Illinois, another game where they kind of played sloppily for a first half. But that's a respectable NIU program that just last year we saw what they did going on the road and beating Notre Dame. And you win that game comfortably. But the Arizona State game was a real turning point. I mean, that was the moment that made it very clear, okay, this team has got things moving in the right direction. They not only are a more competitive team and not only a team that can be respectable, they're a team that can win a game against a quality opponent. And look, I went into the year with I think I went into the year with relatively low expectations just from what is reasonable for this team, because you look at the schedule, it's a difficult slate. And they have a lot of difficult games left to come. And I came into this saying, look, you should win your 3 non-con games against lesser teams, win those easily. And then can you find one win the rest of the way against a quality team? And if you do that, I'm not going to sit here and say I'd be happy with that, but I can sit here and say that is legitimately a big improvement from where they were last season. They accomplished that in the first 4 weeks of the season.
Yes.
And now you have a chance to build upon that further. Now, like I said, the schedule is still incredibly difficult the rest of the way. There is not a guaranteed win left on the schedule. I think even with Florida and Arkansas and the struggles those teams have had, they're both on the road. And those are teams that, like, Florida has a very good defense. Arkansas still has a good offense. So it's not like those teams are just going to be pushovers when State plays them. They still are going to have to fight to find a few more wins and get bowl eligible. But they've given themselves a chance to be bowl eligible, which is something that a lot of people did not think would be possible coming into the year with where they were a season ago, with the questions that remained for this team and with the difficulty of the schedule. The fact that Jeff Lebby has this team in a position, and I know we're only 5 weeks into the year, we'll see how things transpire the rest of the way. But the fact that it is looking somewhat likely that they're going to find a way to go to a bowl game, that is a huge step forward for Lebby in year 2. And that gets me really confident about what the future can be under him moving forward.
And what I want to say to that and add to it as well is a lot of people were down on State. And for everyone that said, oh, I had Mississippi State winning 5-6 games, you're full of baloney, I think would be fair to say. Unless you're the fan of the team, then okay, I can understand that. But I'll be honest with you, Andrew. I had Mississippi State winning 4 games. And I was told that to be generous. I thought, okay, they'll win their cupcake games, and they might steal one from one of these SEC teams or maybe looking ahead. And Mississippi State could play spoiler like Purdue does in the Big Ten. And
I think that would have been a fair prediction, by the way. Yeah.
And what I want to say, too, is on the Jeff Lebby thing, I'm all in favor. I don't know how you feel about this or your fan base, but I'm all for giving coaches at least 3 years. 3 years is my number. I give you 3 years. First year is you're kind of growing. Second year is let's see some improvement. And third year, it's kind of like, okay. And then after that third year, it's kind of one of them, okay, where are we at as a program? How do you feel about that? If Lebby had been stinking it up, which he's not, obviously, but if he had been, would you have been willing to give him another year? What's your philosophy on that? Are you more of a guy that likes just 2 years? How do you feel about that when it comes to giving coach leeway?
It's interesting because Mississippi State has had a couple of examples here. The last 2 coach firings they've had have been less than 3 years. Joe Moorhead only had 2 seasons. Zach Arnett did not have a full year. Now, in both of those cases, it was very clear that those hires were not trending in the direction they wanted to. And look, with Joe Moorhead, I will always say that I don't think he would have been as bad as a lot of other State fans felt had they kept him longer. But I also don't think he was going to win to the level that was expected. And there were also issues, I will say, with the Moorhead thing. This gets overlooked. There were some off-field things as well. And I'm not talking about him from a personal standpoint. I was talking about with the team. There were behavioral discipline things within the football locker room that were starting to bleed over into the field. And that's why they chose to make that move as early as they did, coupled with the underperforming results on the field. And with Zach Arnett, we already talked about it. That was a hire that was made because you had to put someone in a position. They had to promote somebody in that moment to try to stabilize things after Leach passed. They didn't have an AD at the time. And then it became very clear he just wasn't ready. So, that one's a little bit different. I think it really just depends. I think Lebby is a coach where 3 years probably would have happened regardless. I think the only thing that might have prevented a year 3 would have been a Chad Morris level outcome where you're talking about back-to-back 2-10, 0-8 type seasons. If that had happened, there would have been a whole lot of pressure to pull the trigger and move on. Even if even with considering the situation. But I do think there is a point to be had that because of the situation he inherited and because of how difficult the slate was going to be this year, you have to recognize that it was going to take time for this thing to improve. And I always sort of said, looking at this team, less than the record, I need to see how are they performing and what do they look like in games. And, I may feel differently if they were sitting here right now with 1 or 2 wins. Maybe I'd feel a little bit differently than I'm speaking right now. Because at this point, it's very clear. Hey, Jeff Lebby's going to be the coach for Mississippi State next year, unless, I guess if he won a bunch of games and another job opportunity came open, I guess that's another story. In all likelihood, there's not a situation where Mississippi State is firing Jeff Lebby right now. And I think probably would have gotten that opportunity regardless. But there would have been a lot of pressure to make the move. And I would say that I can understand in the portal era, I can understand I can still understand giving a bit of a year zero, right? A lot of people push back against the notion of year zero because we have the portal. I can tell you Jeff Lebby was in a year zero last year. And that doesn't happen a lot these days, but the situation was so poor, it was going to be a reset. I will say, though, if going into the second year, or I guess in this case, pseudo year one, you would have had to have shown some sort of improvement if we're giving you that leeway for the first year. And he's shown that at least. So you feel good about it moving forward.
And I think it's important. Like, some fan bases are different. And that's the thing. I think, like, I'm a Louisville fan, as a lot of people know. And as Louisville and Mississippi State fans, we kind of give our coaches a little more leeway. We've had some great ones. Obviously, like you mentioned, Dan Mullen, Charlie Strong for Louisville, Bobby Petrino. Obviously, Scott Satterfield was good for us. Obviously, Mike Leach was very good for Mississippi State. We've kind of had our fair share of pretty good coaches to great coaches. But we're one of those programs, we don't push anything. And I think that's fair, but like your Ole Misses, your A&Ms, your Floridas, I mean, Billy Napier, Lord have mercy, that poor guy, he can't catch a break. He's one of them coaches, he's always getting poked, so to speak, with getting threatened to fire. I just feel like it all depends on your situation, too, and it's a fair assessment. And like you said with Libby, he kind of was dealt a bad hand. And when you're dealt a bad hand, you're kind of handcuffed, and you're kind of like, okay, I was dealt this hand. How can we make this positive? The bed was made. How do I turn this positive? And he's done a great job of doing that. I mean, they beat Arizona State this year, which is a monumental win. And from where this program was, a lot of people would think Arizona State's not that big of a win. Well, if you look where Mississippi State's been, it's a huge win because it shows that, hey, we can compete with one of the league's best, like you mentioned. And I know people laugh and say, well, it's the Big 12. The Big 12 loses these games. Arizona State won the Big 12 title game. They took Texas darn near to the end and almost won. Heck, they should have won in a lot of people's cases. So for me, this is a really great win. And the fact that they almost beat Tennessee is another sign of, hey, maybe we can compete in conference play. Maybe Mississippi State is not as bad as we all thought. Let's cut them some slack. And looking forward, looking at the schedule, like you said, there's A&M, there's Florida, there's Texas, there's Arkansas, there's Georgia, there's Missouri, and of course there's the Egg Bowl on Black Friday. All those games, I'm sure Mississippi State's going to be a dog game. But there's not a game on there where you could say, oh, they can't win. There's a path for them to win them all. More importantly, Ole Miss, it's a rivalry game. As we all know, anything can happen in those games. But looking at the rest of the way and looking at kind of the first half, like you mentioned, what letter grade would you give this team and this coaching staff? Would you say it's been a B+, A+ job? What would be your letter grade for them?
It's got to be a solid A. And the only reason I'm not going to say A+ is just because there's been a few moments in games where you've seen some sloppiness and things that need to get corrected. Like I mentioned, the Southern Miss and Northern Illinois games were both very much half games. The same can be said for Arizona State. Arizona State, keep in mind, they led that game 17-0 and allowed Arizona State to come all the way back and had to win in miracle fashion, which, by the way, you talked about the reaction to that win. There were a lot of questions from people like, why are they storming the field for beating Arizona State? One, I think part of the field storming did happen because of the way the game was won. Like winning a game, which as a Mississippi State fan, State does not win games like that. That happens to Mississippi State. Mississippi State does not win games in the fashion that they won that game. There was that aspect, but also that was an explosion of emotion from everything that had transpired over the last few years. It was not about it being Arizona State. It was about our program has done something good to be happy about. And that's where that excitement came from. But getting back to talking about the letter grade to this point, yeah, I think it's a solid A. The only thing holding it back from being an A+ is just some general sloppiness. There's a few things that have to get cleaned up. For Jeff Lebby being the offensive mind that he is, the offense right now is not fully clicking the way that they would like it to. Defensively, they are playing as good as I possibly could have asked for. For how bad the defense was a year ago and knowing how long it was going to take to really reshape the roster, the fact that they are fielding, I would say, a good defense. I mean, look, Tennessee, they gave up 20 points in regulation defensively. Two of Tennessee's touchdowns were offensive touchdowns, came off of Mississippi State's offense. They were turnovers. So the defense itself allowed 20 points in regulation to Tennessee. And they gave up a lot of yards, but I don't care about the yards. I care about the points. Like State's defense played really well in that game. So State's defense has been outstanding. Offensively, pretty good. There's still a few things to improve upon. Need to clean up penalties, need to clean up sloppiness. But to be 4-1 right now and have 4 wins where 3 of them are total blowouts, you get the good win over Arizona State. You were competitive with Tennessee and could have won the game. I cannot ask for more than that from this team right now. It's an A.
And that's a fair grade. And before we move on to your annual opponents, because the SEC released their annual opponents, and Mississippi State had some interesting ones, but kind of putting a bow on the rest of this year. I won't ask you to predict games because it's hard to predict games, but looking at the rest of these games, are there any 2 or 3 games that you're looking at on the schedule you say Mississippi State does have a shot? I do feel confident we can win this game. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think they're going to have a shot in a lot of them. And to be honest, with the way they're playing right now, and I mentioned the easy pickings are Florida and Arkansas just because of what those teams have been at this point. And I'm not just trying to pick the low-hanging fruit. But with Florida, there is the question of will Billy Napier even still be the head coach at that point? We know who's coaching Arkansas right now. So what is that? Is Bobby Petrino going to keep that team fired up, or are they going to, quit on it? Who knows what that situation is going to be? Oddly enough, of all the teams they have to play the rest of the year, Missouri has been the one that has looked the best, I would say, to this point, consistently over the course of the year. I'm not going to tell you State's going to beat Georgia. I think Texas's defense is going to be too much. Even though Texas's offense has been a little iffy with Arch, that defense is really freaking good.
They got some spreads.
That's gonna be tough to deal with, even in Starkville. We'll see how the game in College Station goes this weekend. State's had a pretty good track record against A&M. And A&M defensively has – I know they held Auburn down with that Auburn offense. We've kind of seen how that's gone this year. That A&M defense has not been great, so we'll see if State can put up some points and have an opportunity there. The Egg Bowl on Black Friday, that would – I have a feeling that if Mississippi State wants to keep Ole Miss out of the playoff, they're going to need to win that game. Because of the way things are setting up for Ole Miss right now, they are on a collision course with getting to the playoff, which I don't want to see that. So I'm hoping Black Friday goes State's way. I do look. I think State will have a chance. It's the Egg Bowl on Black Friday. State will have an opportunity for sure. So I think they can find a couple wins the rest of the way. I think they can get bowl eligible. Pinpointing any 2 will be tough, but I do trust this team to find a couple wins.
And what I want to mention about the Ole Miss game is it's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. I mean, we've seen it years and years. I mean, Mike Leach's last ever win in his coaching career was one of the craziest endings you could have ever imagined to a rivalry game. Lane Kiffin not using his timeouts on a 2-point conversion, which ended up costing them the game, then using a timeout previously and all that. And it's just like when people say, oh, Ole Miss is going to run over Mississippi State, I'm like, you sure about that? It's a rivalry game. There's bad blood. They don't like each other. And their fan bases really don't like each other. So I expect that to be an all-out game. Missouri attacked Mizzou. I mean, like you said, they look the best, but we'll see. Mississippi State has had a history of pulling off some games that no one thought they could. And then, of course, A&M. What I'm curious to see is what's the morale of the locker room? Meaning, coming off a heart-wrenching loss to Tennessee, are they going to pick themselves up on Saturday, or are they just going to let themselves get beat down again? And if Jeff Lebby's got this program where we hope it's going, they'll pick themselves up and be like, we got another chance. We're playing number 6 in the country. Let's get it going in College Station. Do you think they'll pick themselves up on Saturday, or do you think they'll come in with their heads down?
Yeah, it is a good question to have. I'm wondering myself. I tend to think they'll pick themselves up. What I'll always go back to is last year, for as bad as it was, if there is one thing that could be said for that team, it's that they never did quit. And, they gave effort in every single game. And I understand there's a level of saying, that's what you expect. But there's a lot of 2-10 football teams that go 2-10 because they quit trying and they give up on the season.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe that's a better thing to say than being a 2-10 team because you're just that bad. But Mississippi State last year was a 2-10 team that was that bad. But, man, they tried. And as pathetic as that sounds, they fought in several games a season ago when things were rough. Loss after loss after loss. They continue to pick themselves up and play hard. Lebby does seem to have this team already with a mentality of, look, no matter what the situation is, we're going to respond and come out ready to go the next week. Doesn't matter. We have to take this next step forward. I think they'll be ready to go in College Station.
And it's interesting that you bring up that. So looking forward to 2026, the SEC made the announcement of their annual opponents. And Mississippi State, as you can see, I pulled up all the teams kind of get of where the landscape is going. But specifically, we're going to focus on State, of course, because I got the State man here. We're here to talk State. Obviously, Mississippi State is going to have Ole Miss, which is good. The Egg Bowl is going to remain the same. I'm glad they didn't touch that. Vanderbilt, Alabama for Mississippi State. Now, I can understand Bama. There's some history there. They played some games, and they do have a history. But Vanderbilt, though, for people that may be new or people that may not be smart to it, so to speak, what is the history with Vandy? Is this just one they wanted an opponent for you all, or do you have a history with Vandy? And just talk about the overall annual opponents for Mississippi State and how you feel.
To the question of does Mississippi State have a history with Vanderbilt, not beyond being SEC members together. Okay. I don't know what the number is, but they have not played much. It's one of those games where there's just not a lot of history between the two sides. Now, I think what I think was always going to happen with Mississippi State is there was a chance you were going to get matched up with someone that you didn't necessarily have a ton of history with, simply due to the fact that for Mississippi State, there's only one game that has to be played, and that's the Egg Bowl. Whereas a lot of these teams, you have typically 2 games where it's like, hey, we need those games on our schedule. There's only one rivalry for State that genuinely has to be played, that being the game against Ole Miss. So that was going to open up the door, considering that you have all these other teams that have to fill out multiple games. Mississippi State was probably going to get paired up with someone somewhat random. Now, a lot of us thought Mississippi State Kentucky would happen because they were annual crossover opponents for a long time. They played each other every single year in the East-West format. And that was one that I think made a lot of sense, just given the fact that they had been playing for so long at that point. There had actually been a little bit of a rivalry start to develop at a certain point. And look, 2 teams in a similar tier of the SEC historically, I thought it would have made a lot of sense to keep that series going, especially because Kentucky, kind of like I talked about with Mississippi State, they don't have a lot of SEC games that they just have to play. I think Tennessee's the one team they really care about playing. No one else really stands out for Kentucky within SEC play. So I figured State and Kentucky would get paired up, and obviously they didn't. They ended up pairing up State and Vanderbilt. I will say I'm not going to complain about it, and I understand Vanderbilt is winning games right now. I do want to see what that program looks like post-Pavia. I think Clark Lee's a good coach, and I understand there's some funding and money going to the program that wasn't there previously. I'm going to look at the long-term trend that says Vanderbilt football generally is not going to be the greatest, so having that game on the schedule could be beneficial. That said, we mentioned Kentucky. Maybe there's a point to be said that moving forward, Kentucky's the team in the SEC you would like to have on the schedule every single year. I don't know. That'd be interesting to see. But I think the Vanderbilt pool you can't be too upset about. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be upset about it. I think you look at that and say, okay, that's a team. If you're Mississippi State, you feel pretty good about your chances of getting that win most years. I guess outside of when they have Diego Pavia running around, which I don't know, look, maybe that guy gets another 10 years of eligibility. Like he keeps wanting to have that, so he might still be around longer. And Mississippi State's screwed in that point. We'll see how that goes. As for the Alabama of it all, I think it was kind of inevitable. So Mississippi State is Alabama's most played opponent historically. And for those who don't know why it's State as opposed to Auburn, there was a long time where the Iron Bowl didn't get played because the two teams couldn't stop fighting with each other. I think Tennessee this year when they play Bama will actually tie Mississippi State as the most played opponent. So Tennessee was right behind Mississippi State when it comes to playing Bama. But State and Bama are the two closest SEC campuses to one another. Again, they had Bama's most played opponent. They had played up until last year. They had played every year for like over 100 years. There's a lot of history between the two sides. Is it a rivalry? No, because ultimately it's one of those games where one side has just had such a massive edge over the other that it's not a series that anyone gets fired up about. Ultimately, why is this getting played? Because Bama did not want to have to play 3 games against high-profile teams every single year. If Bama had to have Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee annually, that was going to create an imbalance on the schedule compared to other teams with different permanent or annual rivals. That's why Mississippi State and Alabama happened. From a State standpoint, I don't know how many State fans were really excited to see that return, although I think the fact you got Vanderbilt is kind of like an okay trade-off. And look, State, as much as that series has been dominated by Bama, it's the Kalen DeBoer Alabama moving forward. It's not Nick Saban anymore. So maybe State's got a chance to get a win every now and then as opposed to never. So we'll see how that goes moving forward. All in all, I think it's a slate you have to be okay with if you're State. And look, if things are weird, this all gets adjusted after 4 years. It's not lasting forever. It's only on a 4-year period that they're sticking with these games, or at least 4 years until they reevaluate. So it's not the worst draw for Mississippi State.
Yeah, I will say too, like I mentioned, I'm glad the Egg Bowl staying because that is a good tradition. Like Mississippi State Ole Miss fans, I don't know if you've ever experienced any of it, obviously, but there's no love lost. Like obviously, the Egg Bowl means something to both sides. And like you said, I have a friend who's an Alabama fan. They're excited about Mississippi State Bama coming back and playing again. And I was like, Mississippi State? And I mean that as no disrespect to Mississippi State, but I'm like, really? Y'all kind of owned that series for quite a long time. You're excited about playing that again? And then I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, well, this is Kalen DeBoer, and hopefully Jeff Lebby gets the dogs rolling again. Like, hopefully it becomes something. I mean, like you said, Vandy. The history says it's Vanderbilt. Enough said, but we'll see after Pavia. I'm kind of looking at a couple of the others too. How this could affect Mississippi State. Kentucky, they play Florida and Lee, Tennessee, South Carolina. Of course, Bama plays there too. Is there anybody on here that you would have liked? Like if you would have had your choice, would you have liked to have played Tennessee on an annual basis, Oklahoma, Missouri, or you think they got it just about right?
I think the 3 that most State fans had sort of settled on was Ole Miss, Kentucky, because I think a lot of us just assumed that would happen, and then Texas A&M. Now, let me be clear: there's not a rivalry with A&M, and I know A&M fans did not care about having that happen. In fact, Jimbo Fisher was still the coach at the time, and he basically revealed that they were going to pair Mississippi State and Texas A&M up originally. He said that in a press conference, and they're talking about giving us Mississippi State, and why is that a thing? That's a series that's been competitive. There's a lot of weird overlap between the teams. We're both maroon and white. We were both at one point A&M. Mississippi State used to be Mississippi A&M. We also used to be the Aggies. We have dog mascots. We have traditions that a lot of the rest of college football feel are annoying. We're both coached by Jackie Sherrill, both coached by Emory Ballard. So there's been a lot of ties. between the two schools over the years. So I think that was a series that just made sense because it's like, yeah, it's a more high profile team, but it's a team that State has had success against, and there's been good competitive games. I thought Mississippi State Auburn would have been kind of interesting. I think State is the second most played opponent for Auburn behind Georgia. And there's been a lot of fun games in that series, especially recently. There's been a lot of weird wackiness between that. So, I mean, I would have understood if those had been selections. But I think, you knew you were going to get Ole Miss. I think a lot of us kind of assumed we're not going to be lucky enough to not get Alabama on the schedule. I do think it's funny seeing the Alabama fans that are like excited to see it come back. And I'm like, it's really easy to be excited when a game you fully expect to win every single year. But, I'll take them at their word. The Vanderbilt was a weird thing, but I'm not going to complain about that. So I think it can work out for State.
Well, last thing I want to bring up is I saw a couple people within the State community say they would have liked to have seen Florida. Now, I know Florida, Mississippi State, I know they played some games, and it's probably not much of a rivalry, but Florida fans seem to enjoy playing you all. I don't know if it from those years you all were both like really good and in your prime, and those were great games to watch. What is it about the Florida fans and Mississippi State fans that y'all just like playing one another? Because I saw that quite a bit. Florida fans were hoping for you, and there were some State fans that were hoping for Florida. What's the history with that?
I can't say that I've seen State fans. I won't say you haven't seen it. I don't know of any State fans that wanted to see Florida. I mean, if Florida fans wanted State, unless they're thinking that, hey, Mississippi State looks like they're bad right now, so we want them on the schedule, I don't – I'll be honest, I don't know much there. There have been some games over the years for sure. 2000 in Starkville was that's a Florida team that goes on to win the SEC, and State put 50 on them. And Jackie Sherrill team blew them out in Starkville. 2004, that's a game where a bad Mississippi State team got Ron Zook fired from Florida. Jarius Norwood breaks off a long touchdown in the final minutes to win that game for the Bulldogs. In Sylvester Croom's first year. Dan Mullen, his first year at State, they played a close game with Florida in Starkville and Tim Tebow. Florida won the game, but it was kind of a big moment for the program because it was number one Florida, and they were in the game late. They won in Gainesville the next year, running the ball. I think they threw the ball 9 times in the game and ran the ball 1,000,000 times and won the Swamp and Urban's last year. Obviously, Mullen made his return to Starkville as the head coach of Florida in 2018, and he gets the win over his old team in a game that still haunts me, as I was in attendance for that one. There's been some interesting games over the years. I can't say there's a ton of deep history, so I don't really know what they may be looking for. But I will say I had seen a projection that talked about Mississippi State and Florida at one point, just because kind of what I talked about earlier. If you're Mississippi State, there was a chance you got paired up with someone that you don't have a lot of history with, and Florida was a potential option there. But I don't know much in terms of a history between State and I know it has rattled off various games, but in terms of I could do that for any team, right? It's just I don't know if there's any deep ties between the two sides.
But these are the SEC annual opponents going forward. Like you mentioned, these are rotating. And for people out there thinking this is set in stone, you're still going to play the games that you could play. Like Florida, if you want Mississippi State that bad, they might be on the schedule in a couple years. LSU, Mississippi State's still going to have their chance to play a lot of these teams. They just won't be protected lock games anymore. These are the 3 games going forward that Mississippi State knows for the next 4 years we're going to have to play these teams. But what I want to finish up with, Andrew, is kind of talk to me about – we're going to go back to the past a little bit. And when Mississippi State had some brighter days. Hopefully their brighter days are going to come back ahead. But talk to me about some of your favorite Mississippi State teams, players, coaches that you maybe grew to like, or maybe a team that you remember that kind of shaped your fandom. The floor is yours. Take it away.
I mean, look, if you're my age, and this really applies for all State fans because it's a legendary season, but if you're my age, the 2014 season obviously was such a a big deal. I was in high school when that happened. And, as I mentioned, I got into football a little bit later in life, and I sort of just chose Mississippi State. So this is only a few years into my fandom, which I picked a pretty good time to become a Mississippi State fan. I know the history of the team pretty well. I was not having to follow the Bulldogs during some of the dark days of the 2000s when the teams were pretty rough. I got in during the Mullen era, which is pretty good for the program. But 2014 was obviously such a fun season to see that team number 1 in the country and all the guys who went on to have great NFL careers, most notably Dak Prescott. But then you also you guys like Chris Jones, Preston Smith on defense, Bernard McKinney at linebacker had a nice stint in the NFL, and then the guys you had on offense. Josh Robinson, the bowling ball, who I had a cool moment with a few years later, sitting behind me at a state game, which was pretty neat. De'Runny Wilson at wide receiver, may he rest in peace. The guy was an absolute awesome player for State, who fortunately was taken from us too soon. Just a really, really fun team to get to watch and have all those big wins and those big moments. And the season ended, rough. They lost 3 of their last 4. Obviously, go from number 1 to ultimately miss the playoff and then lose the Orange Bowl. But that's just the third 10-win season in school history. So to have that was great. I'll tell you, 2 of my favorite games as a State fan. The one that's early in my fandom is the 2013 Egg Bowl. So it's the year before, and that's a game. It was Thanksgiving night. It was the first Egg Bowl played on a Thanksgiving since the early 2000s. So it had been about a decade at that point. And as I mentioned, I had just been a State fan I'd really just been following the team for a few years. But I was a sophomore in high school, and I had a lot of teachers who were Ole Miss people in high school. And I took a lot of crap because I always wore my Mississippi State hat. I was always wearing maroon. And like I said, I'd only been a fan for a few years, but I was all in. And I had to listen to a lot of junk. And the year before, 2012, which is my freshman year of high school, that Mississippi State team started off the year 7-0, and then things fell apart. And they end up losing the Egg Bowl in Oxford. That was Hugh Freeze's first team. Bo Wallace and Dante Moncrief destroyed the State secondary in that game. And I had to hear it, and I had to hear it for a full year. And 2013 was a kind of a tough season for Mississippi State. They dealt with a lot of injuries. They played one of the toughest schedules in the country that year. But they had to scratch and claw. But that was Dak Prescott sort of coming out party. Tyler Russell was the starting quarterback, but he gets hurt early in the season. Dak comes in and starts making all these incredible plays, and it was kind of a 2-quarterback system for a while. You go into the Egg Bowl, and Tyler Russell was out. He was hurt. Dak Prescott was also out. He had gotten hurt a few weeks earlier with like a stinger in his arm, and this is right after his mom had passed away. From her battle of cancer. So State is on their 3rd-string quarterback, a true freshman, Damian Williams. And that Ole Miss team was expected to come in Starkville and they weren't a great Ole Miss team, but they were like a 7-win team. And Mississippi State sitting at 5-6. It was a cold night in Starkville, again, a Thanksgiving night, and State's defense played one of the most incredible games you will ever see. And they had that thing. Really, State should have pulled away and won, but I think Ole Miss had a blocked punt touchdown that had set them up. They were ahead 10-7 late in the 4th quarter. And Dak was not supposed to play this game. They didn't think he was going to be able to play. Dak started warming up on the sidelines, getting loose. And they put him in the 4th quarter. And he leads State on a game-tying drive to tie the game at 10. He ends up leading State on a drive that should have won the game. They had a field goal at the end of regulation to kick it and win it. And they missed that field goal because up until recently, State kickers have long been rough. It's not been a great history of kickers in Starkville. Game goes to overtime. State gets the ball first. They end up getting a 4th and 2 at the 3-yard line. And instead of kicking a field goal, Dan Mullen decides we're going to go for it. And we run Dak Prescott up the middle. He gets in the end zone. State goes up 17-10. Ole Miss gets the ball. They drive it inside. It's an overtime, and so they don't have to drive it far. Ole Miss quarterback Bo Wallace has a keeper, and he is about to walk into the end zone. And then he gets tripped up by a State safety who at the same time punches the ball out. And he fumbles just before he crosses the goal line. He gets picked up from State. There's a great picture of Bo Wallace laying flat in his face with his arms stretched out with the ball just out of reach. State picks it up, wins the game in overtime. They go to a bowl game. Winning that game, going to the bowl, they blow out Rice in the Liberty Bowl. That really gave them momentum going into the offseason to set up the 2014 season being what it was. But that win, it was just a ton of fun to see them get that win. It was fun for me personally because I got to go back to school and kind of rub it in the face of everybody who had been throwing it my way for the past year. So I got to have it. That game is always big for me. The second one, and this is a few years ago, the comeback against Auburn with Mike Leach in 2021, State down 28-3, which is a Saints fan. That's a very important number to me. 28-3 is the Atlanta Falcons. It's why they don't have a ring and never will.
Sorry, Falcons fans, if you're listening to that, he doesn't mean that. No,
Saints right now. I got to take in some shots where the Saints are garbage. I'm aware of that. But we have a Super Bowl ring. State is getting destroyed, and that game is so funny because early in the second quarter, they do the sideline report, and one of the reporter says that she overheard Mike Leach telling his players, as State is getting blown out, and Leach is telling his players, if we execute, they can't stop us. And everyone is kind of just like, all right, Mike, like, look, we love you, but we're getting killed right now. I don't know if this is just, if we execute, they can't stop us. Well, they started executing, and they put together that was one of the most impressive offensive performances I've ever seen. The way that offense started from the end of the first half, they got a touchdown drive right before the end of the second half to make it 28-10. And what they did from that moment on through the rest of the game, Will Rogers was on absolute fire. Just was absolutely precision operating that offense. Auburn couldn't deal with it. And they found ways. They continue finding ways to move the football. Their defense stepped up and started making some stops, and they come all the way back to win that game. I think 43-36 is the final score. One of my favorite games as a State fan. It's obviously that's going to be my lasting memory of the Pirate in his time in Starkville because obviously everybody remembers the LSU game when he starts his career and KJ Costello throwing for 623 yards and a bunch of touchdowns against the defending champs. And that game was awesome. But when you think about like knowing what the air raid normally looks like and what the air raid actually being executed at a high level looks like, it was that game against Auburn. And that one will always stand out to me as just an incredible performance.
And those are some fun memories. And that's what I love when I talk to my guests, and I will continue to do this, is getting to know their favorite games and your favorite memories, because as fans, we all love our teams. And it's so nice to see, especially when you're a smaller team, it's so nice that you have those moments. Like the bigger teams, of course, you would say, oh, when we won the Natty. And it's just like, not saying that that's not great. We would both kill for Natty, both Louisville and Mississippi State, obviously. We both had our chances at it in 2014 and for us in 2016. But it's just nice to see those little games. Like you mentioned the Auburn game. It probably didn't have big significance in the big scheme of things, but it meant something to you. And that's what I love. Like the Sugar Bowl for me in 2013 when we beat Florida. In the big scheme of things, yeah, we won the Sugar Bowl. But the next year, it didn't mean anything. We weren't ranked in the top 10. We weren't ranked top 5. Heck, we weren't even ranked in the top 25. But to me, that always will be one of my most special moments as a Louisville fan. And before we get out of here, Andrew, it's kind of funny that I bring Louisville up. We kind of have a little history. We played 2 games against one another. And we were talking about this before we came on air. Satterfield's first bowl win after the Bobby Petrino mess that he left. And then Lamar's last ever collegiate game, 4 picks against State. We both have happy memories, but what do you remember about playing Louisville? Just out of curiosity.
Well, obviously, I more fondly remember the game in 2017. And that one, that game was big for the program because that was right after Dan Mullen had left. Because 2017 was Mullen's last season. And I'll say, look, at this point, State fans have put past any hatred for Mullen that was there. And I know some people may be wondering, how on earth could you guys ever hate the coach when he was so good for you? Look, anytime you get left, you're going to be upset for a little bit. And State fans were pretty rightfully upset with how that ended. So at the time, we were pretty ticked with Dan Mullen, even for all he had accomplished in Starkville. And he had left that team. Nick Fitzgerald, the starting quarterback, had gotten hurt in the Egg Bowl. He had his leg snapped, literally snapped.
Yeah, that was ugly. I remember that.
You were on a backup quarterback. You didn't have your head coach, and you also had several assistants had left. The interim coach was running backs coach Greg Knox, who ended up being MSU's interim coach in 2023 as well, on a different part of a different coaching staff. So he's done it now twice for State. But going up against Louisville and you have Lamar Jackson on the other side, and it wasn't even so much the opponent. It's like, hey man, but it is a little bit. We've got a Heisman winner on the other side of the field, and our program has been not. I don't want to say our program has taken a tough blow, right? Just in the past few weeks, losing our coach, losing our quarterback, and to be able to go and win that game. And like I said, the defense steps up. They forcing the turnovers that they did against Lamar. MSU true freshman quarterback Keaton Thompson, who would later transfer to Virginia and become a good hybrid wide receiver tight end for the Cavaliers. But he has to start that game for State and played an outstanding ball game. And MSU grinds out a 31-28 win. That was it was a feel good win for Mississippi State to get that one and get a 9-win season. And unfortunately, it did not lead to momentum the next year. They had high expectations for the next year one under Joe Moorhead, and it did not go the way they wanted it to. But it was a feel-good moment at the time. The game the next time, there's also weird circumstances with that one in Nashville for the Music City Bowl. Once again, the quarterback State was expecting to start does not play that game because he was punched in the face by a teammate in bowl practices and basically had his eye socket broken.
Oh, wow.
I mentioned earlier about some of the off-field stuff with Joe Moorhead's tenure and player discipline. That's an example of that. And that's kind of one of those things that kind of did Joe in. So that happens, and I think State was up 14-0 in that game. It was weird. The offense was clicking early, and then Louisville just took over. And
that was
the rest of the game was kind of a blur, to be honest.
Be honest with you, that was Satterfield's first full year because Bobby Petrino had left the program in a bad state. We were 2-10. We experienced what you all are experiencing now. And let me tell you, going from having a Heisman winner and being this close to winning your conference and being in a playoff spot, and you all know that very well too, it's not a good feeling sitting there and watching this team just as the buzzard circle, so to speak. And it's like, is this what we really are? But it was just it was so relieving for me when we beat Mississippi State. And I feel bad for you all since you're here, but at the time I was like, thank you. We needed something. And you all were up actually 17-0 at halftime in that game, funny enough. And then all of a sudden you all forgot how to play offense. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. And you started throwing turnovers left and right. And it was just like, okay. And kind of like you mentioned before you came on air, you all were done with that team to begin with. But go ahead.
We may not have gotten Mike Leach had that game not gone the way it did. So I don't think we're going to complain.
It worked out in everyone's favor, but there is a short history there between us. But it's more of a respect thing. I haven't met too many Mississippi State fans that say, "Oh, we despise Louisville. We wish them nothing but bad." And I haven't met many of our fan base that feels that way. We're kind of on the even playing field. We wish each other good success, and we just want good things to happen. But speaking of good things happening, Blake Shapeman, real fast. I want to talk about him. He's been balling this year, especially that last throw he made against Arizona State. Maybe one of the better throws I've seen him throw in college. And there was talks about him maybe not being the starter coming into the year. What do you think up to this point? Do you think that was just good friendly competition? He was always going to be the starter, or was there something to prove there? Because I want to hear Mississippi State's fan perspective.
Well, a few things. One, the conversation of him being a starter or not, that was very much a fan base thing as opposed to an actual team thing. Mm-hmm. He was always going to be the starter for this team. He would have been the starter had Michael Van Buren, who obviously played a lot last year and took over as the starter once Shapen went down. Had Van Buren returned, Blake Shapen was going to be the starting quarterback on this team. And that is how Jeff Lebby viewed it. And that played a role in Van Buren. I know Van Buren is not starting at LSU. That still played a role in him choosing to ultimately leave. It was not solely that. Obviously, NIL was a factor as well. But the other reason for that, and part of why there was conversation amongst the fan base, is Camario Taylor, who is a true freshman on this team, highest rated quarterback signee Mississippi State has ever had. The kid is different from a physical standpoint and from a talent standpoint. He's got something. And there's a lot of fans who are very excited for the opportunity of him. And some people who've not been fully blown away with Shapen, going back to last year, who were kind of wanting like, hey, man, like some of it was a perspective of we don't think this team's going to be very good. We might as well just go with the kid who we can build around for the future. From a team perspective, that was never going to be the case. It was always going to be Shapen. Now, we talk about Shapen this year. I would say first couple weeks, yeah, I would agree. Last game was not his best. Now, having gone back and watched it closer, a lot of the issues that happened in that game, I don't really put on him. I think there were some situations where even some really ugly plays, I don't know what more he was supposed to do. But that said, I will like his play's not been to where it needs to be, personally, just from what I've watched. And it's not a situation where I'm saying he needs to get benched. It's not a situation where he's going to get benched because he's going to be the quarterback. But people do want to see Camario get to play a little bit more and get to have more of a package on the field than he's seen thus far. I still think Shapen is a pretty good quarterback. I think he can do enough to execute the offense and lead MSU to success. Just need a little bit more consistency from him going forward. But look, the best of Blake Shapen is a really good starter. And if they can get a little bit more consistency from him going forward, they'll be fine.
And I think it's important to point out, too, is that throw that won the game against Arizona State. Not a lot of people recognize this. Yeah, the receiver was open, but Shapen took a big hit at the end of that play. And people don't realize how hard it is as a quarterback when you're getting ready to get hit, and you know it. Like, he knew he was going to get hit. You could see it. But he still delivered a perfect ball. That's the thing I admire about him. And I was like, that's what you want to see in your quarterback. They know they're going to get hit. They know they're going to get their chin strap unbuttoned, so to speak. But he still delivered it. He still made the throw, and they still won the game. And to me, that speaks volumes. To me, that earns a lot of respect. And I'm sure State fans, I'm sure some of them have been like, okay, yeah, he has his moments where he's like, oh, that's a bad play. But you cannot deny the guy's. That's one thing about him that I've noticed watching him is he will take
the toughness. The toughness is there. For sure, the toughness is there. Now, there's times he tries to act a little tougher than he should. There's some times where he'll scramble and take a hit he has no business taking on contact. But you can't deny the kid is tough.
And that's what you want to see in a quarterback. That's all you can ask is be like, I'll give you my best if you give me your best. And I think we've yet to see the best of Blake Shapen. I'm not in no means saying that Arizona State's the best it's going to get. You all should not look for anything better. I think he could still play better. I think, if I'm being honest, that was probably a B-plus game. Because there were some throws in that game he over-missed. And there were some things that he did. I was like, still need a little work. But that was a game when he goes to the draft next year. A lot of people are going to be like, they're going to put that tape on and be like, okay, he didn't play his best, but he made the throw when it counted. But yeah, toughness and giving heart and grit, I think, is one of the most important things you need in a quarterback. And as from the whole team standpoint, as we wrap up here tonight or today, because it's still daytime, this Mississippi State team, they may not be loaded with talent, but here we are sitting at 4-1, and no one ever would have ever given Mississippi State any credit, but here they are. So there's 3 words you can use to describe the team as a whole, Andrew. What would it be?
Ooh,
I'm
not very good at things like this. I'm trying to think. I will say resilient is something I will definitely give them. And I think that's the word I'll stick with here. And I'll stick with one word. I'll go with resilient because I'm sticking with one word because I can't think of multiple words.
That's good. Resilient's a good word.
So I'll say resilient because I do think this is a group that even when they have not played well in a moment, they've been able to respond to it. And in some of those games that they won comfortably, and perhaps it's easy to have resilience in a game where you know that you're the much better team. But they responded well. And after poor first halves, instead of letting that pile up, they said, hey, look, let's wake up and let's take over the game. Arizona State and the fact you blow a 17 lead and you all the way to the point of trailing, there's resilience there from one, the defense holding up there on that goal line stand at the end to hold a field goal. There's resilience in the offense stepping up and saying, we're going to win this football game. And then the Tennessee game, I know they lose the ball game, but there were a lot of moments that, this is a game where I think both teams had a lot of plays they would like to have back for sure, which is why I kind of look at it. It's like the result is sort of, in the end, the better team ultimately won. And I can't say that, State should have won the ball game, but they stepped up big in some tough moments where, even after some crazy turnovers, even after some really rough moments, they still found ways to respond and go and keep themselves in that ball game. So this has been a resilient group, and they're going to have to be moving forward. It's a tough SEC schedule. You're definitely going to find yourself in some tough spots moving forward. You got to be able to bounce back.
And what I want to bring up too is that goal line stand. Not a lot of people talk about it, but at Mississippi State, if they would have let them score there, we're looking at a whole nother ball game. But the fact that they held up on the goal line, Andrew, that's the thing for me. Like, not a lot of people give them credit. I even said when I did my post-game breakdown of that, I said Mississippi State's defensive line made the stop. And you got to realize that was, a 16-play drive that they were on, and they took up almost 8 minutes. A lot of defenses would have just folded in and said, here, score. We'll just go back the other way and try to win it. But instead, they didn't. They were like, we're going to hold you. We're going to make you kick this field goal. We're not going to let you go up 7. And to me, like you said, your word, resilience. They didn't fold. And I think that shows a lot of improvement from last year. That's kind of been the theme throughout the day that we've talked about is resilience and improvement. Last year, that State team would have probably just let them walk right on in on the first play and not thought any more about it. But they didn't. They held for it. And I think, to your word, resilient, that might have been the most pivotal key play of their season to date.
It's a big one for sure.
But, Andrew, I appreciate you coming on as always. I love talking to Mississippi State people because there's lots of y'all. But it's a pleasure talking to y'all because y'all kind of see things the way we do, Louisville fans, because we don't understand what it's like to be up there with the LSUs and Alabamas, or we're just like, oh, what's that? But in all seriousness, though, thank you for being here, Andrew. And before we go, let the people know where they can find you, where they can check you out, and that way they can come check you out if they're new, because I really do think you're doing great work over at Mississippi State Voice College Football. I frequently go over there and chat with him and Christian as well. It's a great show, and I learned a little more about State more than I didn't know before. So it's a good time. But Andrew, the floor is yours. Let people know where they can find you, and if they want to follow you or talk to you, whatever they want to do, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for your support over on Voice of College Football for Mississippi State. We really do appreciate that. And he's got the link, as you can see right here. So that's Mississippi State at Mississippi State Voice of College Football, or VOCFB, over there on YouTube. You can check us out there. Typically do shows Monday evenings and Thursday evenings on the channel, plus post-game shows on Saturday recapping the game. So that's where you can check us all out when it comes to our live streams during the season. If you want to follow me over on Twitter, I am at AleState2020, at ALESTATE 2020. And then also you can keep up with my writing work at Maroon and White Nation over maroonandwhitenation.com, which is Mississippi State's fan-sided, or the Mississippi State affiliate for fan-sided would be the way that you would put that. But yeah, that's where you can keep up with what I'm putting out there.
And I'll make sure to put those links down in the description as well. That way you all can check it out and give these guys a shot. I know you may say, oh, Mississippi State, they're just boring. They're no fun. They're not going to compete for playoffs. Ta-ta, though. But they can be the ones to spoil playoff hopes. And you want to see this man's reaction when they beat Georgia, right? There's only one place to do that. Now, that might be a little hasty, but you get what I'm saying. Go give them a check out. They'll greatly appreciate it. And leave them a like and comment and subscribe. It lets YouTube know they're doing a good job. And make sure you like, comment, and subscribe on this video when it comes out as well. Lets me know I'm doing a good job and lets me know that Mr. Andrew was greatly appreciated for coming here. And just reaffirms everything we already know, that we're doing great work here. We're building a good community. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you later on tonight at 11:15 Eastern for my show Picks and Analysis. But till then, thank you, Andrew, for being here once again. Appreciate it. And for everyone that's going to watch this, check them out. You won't regret it. I'll give you my word on that. But until then, go Cards. And what's the slogan for Mississippi State, Andrew? Send us out.
Hail State.
Hail State, everyone. Thank you for being here.